Good morning, everybody. So we are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Hayley McGill, and today's webinar, Discipline Self-Serve BI Enables Advanced Analytics, is brought to you by the International Institute for Analytics, otherwise known as IIA, alongside Metric Insights. So just to give you a little background on IIA, we are the industry's leading source of expertise for companies making the transition to data-driven decision-making and advanced analytics. We offer 4 unbiased client-oriented services designed to help organizations across the entire analytics lifecycle, from ideation through strategy and planning to operationalization. So these 4 services are the Research and Advisory Network, the Analytics Leadership Consortium, Analytics Maturity Assessments, as well as our advisory services. So if you did want to learn a little bit more about these, you can head over to our website, which is iianalytics.com/services. So before we get started, I did just want to cover a few housekeeping items. So we will be accepting questions throughout the presentation, which you can submit in the chat window, and we will have time to revisit these at the end. We will also be recording this webinar, so if you do have to step away for any reason, that's okay. You'll find the recorded version in your inbox tomorrow. So with all of that said, I would like to welcome our speakers today, Marius Moscovici and Drew Smith, who you can see over there in the corner. So Marius has over 20 years of experience in analytics and data warehousing with roles at Oracle, Integral Results, and Linden Lab. He was co-founder and CEO of Integral Results, a leading BI consultancy that was acquired by Idea Integration. He also formed and led the analytics group at Linden Lab. And then we have Drew Smith, who is the VP at IIA, responsible for the Analytics Leadership Consortium. So Drew has an extensive background in global business and analytics. So I am now going to hand you over to Drew, and he's going to take it from here.
Yeah, thanks, Haley, and welcome, Marius, and welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon to you, wherever you are in the world. So Marius and I are really happy to be here today. We're going to talk a little bit from our perspectives. As you heard, Marius has been in this game for quite some time. I have as well. We also have the good fortune of having a lot of different clients from different industries, both of us. So we have a lot of different ways to look upon this whole self-serve thing and what it takes to be successful. And so we're going to start off a little bit of pre-framing, then we'll go into some details and share some of the insights that we have from our client interactions as well as our research. And I think, Marius, I think we're maybe 2-3 minutes in, and I'm sure somebody is waiting for the definition of self-serve, as is always the case, right? Please define self-serve. And I think we're going to disappoint you a little bit because we're not going to come with one definition, we're going to come with 2. But I also think we shouldn't start with the definition of self-serve. And this we don't come upon cheekily, we come upon it because we've done a lot of work in the space and we're not quite sure one definition does us any favors. But as I say, let's start with why self-serve before what self-serve. And the reason being is, why even bother wrapping our heads around a really tough to define thing unless we think it's something that has worthwhile. And when we talk to our clients, and when I lean on my experience at IKEA, I think about the value of self-service, that you get to put data and insights into the hands of the people who can act on the data and insights, into people who can change the way you do business. And that's really important, is to think that the why matters a lot more than the exact definition. And then we are not going to disappoint the audience entirely, as I said, but just a little bit. We're going to come up with 2 definitions of self-serve. And we look at self-service, and I keep using self-serve and self-service interchangeably because for 20 years at IKEA, we called it self-serve because that's also where you go and pick your own goods. So it has this sort of double meaning for us. But self-service, we look at from 2 views at IIA. We look at it from the view of the producers, and we look at it the view of the consumers. We'll further define that a bit as well. So when we think about producers, we are thinking about database managers. We're talking about data engineers, data scientists, data analysts. You can tell that there's a trend there. They have data in the title. Many of these people are also consumers, so they need to use the data and examine it and make decisions based on data. But their primary thinking when they think about self-serve and what they want out of self-service initiatives is, make it easy for me. Get out of my way, really. Make it so I can get the data that I want without going through bureaucratic nightmares. Make it so that I can get the tool that I want without the same trouble as well. So when we think about producers, which are an important part of the self-service constituency, we think about those folks. But today, Marius and I are going to focus really on the self-service from the view of the consumers. And these are people who actually don't necessarily ask for data. They actually want insights. They want the data to have already been examined, for algorithms to be applied, for descriptive and predictive and prescriptive analytics to be applied against that data so that they can do something, so that they can go forward and they can take action. So we're going to focus more on this orange box. We're going to talk about what it takes to build a self-serve program for consumers that will actually do a world of good for your friends in the producer world. So Marius, what might you add based on your years of experience to this definition?
Yeah, thanks, Drew. I think these are great definitions. When we look at it, from my perspective, self-service is really one of the great unsatisfied promises of the BI industry, right? For decades, everyone's been talking about it. Progressively, each BI tool comes out and says, we have the self-service solution. And yet, if you look at most enterprises today, you see a landscape where there are multiple BI tools and where there's people have a really hard time from the consumption perspective identifying where the analytics are that they need to work with, which analytics can they trust. There's a proliferation potentially of duplicate content, obsolete content that they've got to stumble through to find the things that are really useful to them. And then on the producer side, you've got you see when new analysts come on board, they hardly step into a self-service environment where they can instantly go in and find the right content and be able to build the right data with the right analytics. Instead, there's a painful onboarding period where they've got to discover what's really there, oftentimes leveraging the existing team, taking up a lot of resources. And then even when they are fully onboarded, when they look at the time that they're spending, they're spending an awful lot of time just addressing people's fires, people coming in and asking them for, give me this report, get me that number, things that they could actually find themselves if they were able to navigate the environment. So I think it's a really difficult problem, and yet it's a problem that if we solve and if we address correctly, it has an amazing amount of impact that it can have on the effectiveness of an organization.
Yeah, Marius, I love that you ended that way because I was going to transition that way. I 100% agree that, since the dawn of databases, self-service has been there, right? It's slightly evolved a little bit, and maybe it's become more about visualization or what have you. But I love the fact that what you say is true, which is that it's unsolved, but we continue to put energy because I think all of us in the industry and those of us who've had some success see when you do solve it, that it's not an incremental change in the way your organization makes decisions with data. It's a huge, giant stepwise change. So it's totally worth it for the folks on this call to put their energy behind it. And even though we are advanced analytics in our title, we really put a big focus on making sure your self-service initiatives in BI and analytics are really robust. And for that reason, actually, we wrote a research brief, which is quite thick, to be frank. So you and I today will cover some of the elements of this research brief, and we'll cover elements actually that are add-ons to this research brief. So we see this webinar as a great complement to the research brief. And this research brief can be had by going onto the Metrics Insights webpage and downloading it. And it's highly actionable. This is not sort of theoretical stuff. This is ask your stakeholders these questions, map your stakeholders, segment them, develop these types of incentives for adoptions. And when you do that, you're going to be able to better set yourselves up for advanced analytics. So it's a really thick brief, but it's also very actionable. So we really encourage people to go to the Metrics Insights website and download this as a complement to this webinar, or vice versa, really. So let's talk a little bit about our thesis in this research brief, which is essentially the thesis title of the webinar itself, which is we think that the self-service effort, which enables BI, actually unleashes your potential for advanced analytics. And we do that by drawing this Rorschach test. So if you're really hungry, it's a pizza slice. And if you've got a sugar craving, it's one of those candy dots. But what it says is that the picture on the left is the reality in many, many places. So you have very few real analytics being done because very often the very talented folks in the analytics department are, for lack of a better way of saying, serving up reports on a semi-ad hoc basis to business users who really just want the insights to make those decisions. And we say that you want to invert this pizza slice. You want to stand up a really rigorous self-service BI and able to enable two things to happen. One, faster access to insights from your business leaders, creating more space and time for your advanced analytics team to do advanced analytics work, predictive, prescriptive algorithms, large scale text analysis, stuff like that. But we also see that the reality when we go out and we workshop this with clients is actually the as is picture, the current state picture looks a little bit more like this, in which some of these dots, which represent just an analytics team delivering back and forth, throwing a request over the wall, building a report. There's so much redundancy in this. There's reports that are slightly different than another report. The title's green instead of red or whatever. And there's reports that are slightly better, but the old report still stands around. So we see so much redundancy in here that we actually have a 4-step program in the brief, but we say step 0 is get your house in order, clean up a bit. And I know you guys have a lot of experience going in and supporting clients with this. So I'm really curious as to see if you can help this, because I've shared with you, Marius, and my personal experience was back in the day, 15 years ago, emailing senior leaders which reports are most important. That's not a good way to do it. I don't recommend that. I believe there has to be a better way. So Marius, can you help us find a better way to get the house in order?
Yeah, that's a great. Getting the house in order is so important. So Drew, way we think about this is this sort of governance methodology for cleaning house and keeping it in order. And it's a continuous process. And it has really two parts to it, right? One is content optimization. So it's all about creating that curated environment. Drew, when you think about going to a museum, right? You come in and you don't see all the things that are in that museum that are in storage. You see the things that are beautiful and functional and useful being brought up and nicely curated, nicely presented to you in a thematic way. And so that's all about content optimization. And then there's resource optimization. Most expensive resource we all have are our BI analysts. How do we make sure that they're working on things that are generating ROI? So if you kind of click on this, you can see the first part of the process is to really look at usage. So understanding, from every touch point, whether that be email, viewing via website, etc. How are people looking at the content that's already out there? Right? Because you're starting from a starting point, right? Then with that, if you advance, then we look at you build and deploy content that is tailored based on the insights that you've gotten from the usage information, right? That it's highly targeted towards audiences that are generate engagement. Then with that, then the next step is really to measure the engagement. So, you've made some specific bets. You're looking at whether that's effective or not. You need to be able to understand whether those usage patterns are happening in the way that you expect based on the content you deployed. Then with that complete, now you look in retroactively and you say, well, how do I, if I'm not getting the engagement that I want, what do I need to promote? Because maybe this particular piece of content should be getting tons of usage, but it's not because people don't know about it. Or what content should be purged or deprecated? Hey, I thought this would be useful, but it turned out that, business is telling us this is not the right analytic. We should be removing it, or it's duplicative to something that's actually higher value, right? And then once you've done that, then the next step is to look at how to optimize your BI resources to make sure that your licensing usage is correct. So you've got, you're not using most of your licenses around things that are not really functional, where users are not actually engaged with that content. And then you driving that usage information to make smart decisions. And then finally, as the final step, then you really look at managing the team and based on all this information. So how do you, generate high value content based on all the information that you've learned through through this whole process?
Well, that's definitely better than an email, I can tell you. So you do have to, we believe, get to this state on the far right. And I think that infinity process you have is good, because I think, again, there is also no truth to the one on the right. There's always going to be a little red circle that pops in, as you say, from good intent. You think this is a great report, you understood your business stakeholder, you put it out in the landscape, but you've got to just be attentive that takes time and resources, as you say, to keep and update. So really good, because we do see that this is foundational to the research brief to get your house in order. So it's great that you're adding to that research brief, your infinity circle. I think it's an excellent add. But I do want to make sure that we're not being, too cynical or too mean-spirited. I think from us, we work with both analytics and business leaders, and I haven't met a business leader out there, maybe I'm naive, who is intentionally making life difficult for an analyst. They're not intentionally asking bad questions. They're not intentionally putting out unrealistic timelines. It's just that the business is changing so quickly that they need a faster response time. So when we think about a self-serve initiative, you also have to have some principles and governance around this, because the things will change. And I'll take a little bit of crack at the principles, and you can take a look at the governance. I think you have some great models there as well. So firstly is, honestly, it needs to be faster for everybody involved if you're building out a self-service initiative. So it needs to actually be faster. It's not simply transferring the work from the central analytics department to a decentralized business function. On a total enterprise-wide, that's just a net loss, right? You're just shifting the cost. So we don't really recommend that. It has to be faster for everybody involved. The other thing is, and some of our clients make silly jokes about this. They sort of joke about sometimes advanced self-serve is really running with scissors, by which they mean that the business leader maybe is not educated that this report is the one that's worthwhile. So we do think it's really important that all of the business leaders and the organization in totality could trust the decisions, because untrustworthy reports are just untrustworthy decisions you haven't found out or failures yet. So we really think that these two principles are great. And I think from a governance point of view, we talk a lot about making it not too heavy, so transparency and low friction. And then I think, again, you've come to us with some really great frameworks, which I think, again, plug and play. Go off the webinar, see if your self-serve initiatives are driving this. And if they aren't, bring in these frameworks. So let's take a look at some of those, Marius.
Thanks, Drew. Yeah, so, you spoke to this, and I think it's absolutely critical. There is no self-service without effective governance, right? That's just, the flip side of the coin to be able to achieve it. And when people think about governance, a lot of times people think about data governance, that's very important. But there's another equally important component to governance, which is all about BI and analytics. How are you governing all the assets that are out there that people are using for their consumption? And so, we believe that starts with first publishing all the content in a single place, right? A single pane of glass where all the users will come in and will access the content, irrespective of which BI tool that particular content comes from, whether it's something maybe the data science team produced with our Shiny or some Python application, whether it's a key Excel document that needs to be shared, or PDF that needs to be shared out there broadly. Everything that users need to be able to effectively make decisions should be accessible through sort of a single interface that provides that information to them. And then with that, once you've got that all consolidated, then it's really about using certification as a North Star. So you can see here, kind of in this particular example, somebody mousing over one of those little certified marks on one of those tiles. They can see for that particular piece of content, not only who the owners are, but the fact that it is certified, who certified it, and when it was certified, right? And that provides that level of confidence that a consumer of information needs to know, to say, okay, I know that I can trust this because somebody's standing behind it. This was actually certified recently, and it was certified by somebody that we know is really an authority. And then if you think about that certification needs to be a process, right? So, it's not about, snapping your fingers and things are certified. Sometimes it can be a very simple process where maybe the content owner can certify things on their own. But in other cases, with content that is sensitive, that has a high degree of impact on the organization, you may have a complex multi-stage process where content is moved through multiple stages with multiple parties involved in the certification process. And so you've got to drive this certification through a requirements basis where you understand, okay, what is the content I have for different kinds of content? What kind of workflows do I need to support certification? Some cases might be very simple. In some cases, it might be complex. And then how does content have to be recertified, right? So for example, if you have financial data, perhaps you close that financial data every month. Well, then at the beginning of the month, that content should be decertified and then recertified once that audit process is complete. But perhaps some sales reporting or operational reporting is certified once and is good for 6 months or 9 months or a year. So there has to be a whole process that guides that certification process for it to be effective. And then if you can advance the slide, then, if you think about certification as that North Star that tells the user kind of where to go, really then tagging and additional context provides all the guideposts that tell them the journey that takes them there, right? So in this example here, you're seeing a Tableau dashboard sort of in the center in this iframe. But the important thing is that it's not just presented in a vacuum. You can see that there are these tags up above that tell you enterprise churn, either hello sign churn, etc. Information that tells you about which enterprise KPIs are represented inside of this dashboard. And that's very important because a user can then know that this is the dashboard that I look at for churn. This is the trusted source of information for that particular enterprise KPI. And what's more, they should be able to, maybe click on that item or mouse over it and then see a pop-up like you're seeing here that tells them, oh, here is the definition of enterprise churn. This is not what it means. Here are the business technical owner, data stewards who are responsible for that area. And then, here there's a list perhaps of other content or references to other content that use that as well. And this you can see together, certification together with this information about, what are the enterprise KPIs that are represented here, and create this context for self-service, where I, as a consumer of information, come in here and say, I know I can trust this. This is certified, and I know exactly what it measures, how that's defined, and therefore I can really self-service through this visualization.
I think this is exciting stuff because one of the things that we often talk about is that a lot of the back and forth, if you don't have this sort of setup, is really simple stuff like, well, what does enterprise churn mean? Or I disagree with it, what you say, what it means, and I'd like to talk to somebody about it, in which case I would probably talk to you according to this little flag here, right? So I think that that's a really useful thing. And this is what we talk about with low friction, right? This just takes friction away. It makes the report more usable for sure, but it also just takes these friction points away and gets us to that point where we're together moving more quickly. So I think it's a really great a great feature.
That's right. And I think, when people think about this, whether it's, with our technology, some other technology, I think the most important thing is to think about the fact that, if you just take those definitions, like you said, Drew, you can go through a process of coming up with, absolutely ideal definitions so that everything is consistent. If those definitions are not bubbled up and presented to the user, if there's no way for them to access it, it's all for naught. Sure, you've got this beautiful pristine area, but they're seeing this jungle where everything is a mess and it's not coherent. So it's got to be brought all the way up to the analytic, and it's got to be presented to users so that they understand what's going on.
Yeah, excellent. And the other thing I can imagine you can do, just a guess. Now I'm going to put you on the spot, so you'll have to do features development if it isn't. But one of the things that people will see in the research brief is that we tell them to cluster their users according to their users' ability. So also you can sort of understand who might or what function be asking them most frequently. Let's just stick with the governance example. Oh, apparently the finance department still really is resisting the definitions that they've come up with for their own terms. And you hand that over to your data governance lead, who sort of can take maybe more of a proactive approach. But I imagine this enables, without being creepy, to sort of track who's really using this report and for how can you support them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we'll go later in the conversation. I think I've got some slides on that. There's the usage analysis is such a key piece because it closes the loop. Right, you can have what you believe to be a perfect governance strategy, but really it's only when you get into battle do you know if it's working, right? You know who you've converted and who's still struggling, right? And I think that's a very important part of the puzzle.
As Mike Tyson once said, everybody has a strategy until they get in the face.
Yes, that's right.
Very good.
We didn't know it was such a luminary in
A
the
philosopher, who
in the
knew?
space.
But
Who
yeah,
knew?
so there's more that can be done. Of course, it's important to cover.
Yeah. And then if you think about kind of the other part, you mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that really there are two constituents, right? There's the data consumers, but also the data producers, the content producers, the folks that are building analytic. Well, for them as well, governance is very important. And they need to understand sort of two things, right? When they're looking at an existing analytic, they may be searching and trying to figure out, well, is there a dashboard out there already that's been built? So I don't have to reinvent the wheel because somebody's already built something very similar. I need to be able to understand lineage, right? So I need to be able to see how is it that, this particular piece of content, where does it source its information from? And then, if the content's being delivered, how does it being pushed out? So kind of understanding how the data has gone into this particular analytics so that I know if I can reuse it. And then similarly, I also need to be able to know, well, maybe if I'm not starting with an existing visualization, but I'm starting with a data set, I want to know, what are the data sets that are certified, that map to those particular terms. I want to write some kind of analysis on churn. Well, I've looked and there's no dashboard on this, but maybe there's a published certified data set that I can use as a starting point. And that prevents that problem that repeats itself over and over in enterprises today, where people go and just recreate something that's just almost the same as something that someone else created, but not exactly. And now you've got two versions of the truth. And now self-service becomes impossible, because how does that third analyst know which data set to start with?
Yeah, and of course, maybe a topic for webinars that we've done, but even in the cloud, replication of data sets are not free. So if you have very large data sets and you're repeating them all over, not only do you have a possibility of conflicting data based on time and everything else, but there will be costs incurred from storing and replicating that data set. So it's a super important thing as it becomes more voluminous.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, there's certainly a lot more tools than surveys and emails and, chats in the coffee break room, which we don't have anymore. So this is fantastic. And we also think that there's more potential, because it's not just about sort of, giving people something and then abandoning them. There's actually a lot of wisdom out in the business crowd. You talked about certified data sets. We talked about certified reports. I mean, I'm humble enough to say that oftentimes when we were doing BI analytics, the smartest analytics came from places you might not necessarily expect. And I think, so we talk about wisdom in the crowd. And then when we think about advanced analytics, I don't really know that I wouldn't hire a data scientist who wasn't at least active on GitHub, right? Oftentimes when you do the interview, they say, here, you can find some of my GitHub. But we put that backwards and say, okay, well, what's like the internal version of GitHub for analytics reports, especially large global companies? And our point of view is always that, intelligence and analytics are most impactful because somebody, process, change a campaign, change the way you staff your hospital, whatever it is, you need to have an analytics compel you to do something. And the people who are most to understand what is compelling is at the folks out there in the crowd. Then the cynic comes in me a little bit and says, but it doesn't mean that's infallible. We all know that there's been mistakes made, classic correlation causation mistakes. But by and large, we are very optimistic that the people out there are in the world able to make better decisions than someone in a siloed central analytics function. And I can remember this very clearly, going once to an IKEA office in France. And it was 5 years after I thought I had solved the problem really well in the US. This person just had completely killed it. And I was like, oh my God, how would I have ever known that you had solved a problem that I struggled with for like 5 years? That's crazy. And it made me infuriated that we were the same company, same P&L, but it should have been something easy to do. So I'm really curious if you solve that problem, because I also know from talking with very large clients of mine that are global, that whole sharing of wisdom across borders, across functions, that's not solved over the time. So I'd be curious to know what solutions you see are the best to go with.
Yeah, I think that's a really a fundamental issue that I think folks are facing, and where we feel like that should be solved or addressed is by really creating this concept of global search. So, I talked a little bit about earlier about why we want to pull everything together under a single pane of glass. Well, the fundamental value you get out of that is the ability to search and to find content across different content types, across different groups, and then be informed uh, with the wisdom of crowds in two different ways. First of all, identify obviously content that other people have created, see how it's tagged, see how it's described. I understand that. Be able to see that there's an engagement slider up there to see, well, which is the content that's actually being used. So you can. There's the two audiences speaking, of course, of the analysts that created it, but then also the users that are consuming it. The content that's being widely used in an organization is highly relevant by definition. So being able to filter on that to identify that content it also leverages it. And then if you advance sort of to the next slide, there's the idea of of discoverability, right? So in that example you mentioned, Drew, maybe that particular analytic that was created by someone else, maybe that's available out there, but you were not given access to it because everyone is understandably concerned about security, and you want to make sure that you're only giving access to the audience that needs to consume something. But what if there's somebody peripheral to that audience that actually could use that content that you haven't thought of when you define security for that object? Well, it needs to be possible to search for content, find it, but then, as you see in this example, kind of maybe have a lock on it, maybe a blurry image, not disclose anything that might let a user know of any of the sensitive information underneath, but let them know that the object exists. And then if they click on it, then provide them the opportunity to then say, oh, okay, I'm going to request access. It's going to go through the proper channel. It's going to get authorized. But that would prevent a piece of duplicative content being created, and it would address that situation that you just described, where somebody can then find a great analytic, a great analysis that data scientists created or somebody built that they may be not aware of, and then request access and get access to it.
Yeah, and I think this is also one of those things. It would seem to me, maybe you have a different experience, but it would seem to me this is also great for preventing, for lack of a better way of saying it, old school shadow IT, right? So I pretend I didn't know that it wasn't out there, so I just build my own report on my own desktop. People worry about the cloud being unsafe, but in reality, it's a phishing scam off of someone's desktop that's likely to reveal personal information or financial information. Not my desktop, of course. My desktop is immaculate and perfect. I know that it happens. Does this help people with the security concerns that they have related to that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think it does because you can have that balance, right? You absolutely need to have security without question, right? But you can have security and you can also have discoverability. And I think that's the part. If you forget about discoverability, if you only focus on security, you create these walled gardens, but no one can see the beautiful plants that are within them, right? You want to make it possible for users to discover the things that are meaningful to them in a way that is governed and controlled, that meets all your security requirements.
Mm. Yeah, excellent. So I think, one of the things that we see is that when you get this kicked off right, this being a self-service initiative to enable advanced analytics, it becomes a very good positive flywheel, right? You get a few people who are more interested, they stop having problems finding it. You, like you said in the recent slide, you discover that you misassessed a certain category of people having access to data, and you can fix that. So we talk a lot about the need to basically make this a continuous thing, continue to help people and support them, give them the data in the context. I think we talked earlier, I liked your example about, sort of the enterprise churn. Everybody's been shown that definition when you onboard, or your data steward tells you, but you just read it and your eyes glaze over. But when you see it in context is when actually you start to get deeper learning, and people want to be much more data driven as an organization, so they need to see these things in context. And in addition, they need to also see where are they working that is close to them, what are the areas close to them that they are affecting. And I think that's how this self-service initiative becomes much more powerful, because it becomes this flywheel effect. More people get better and more people get better, and they help each other and more people get better. I'm so really interested because I think you have some really useful tools to help people see what good looks like and how to build from good to great. So curious about that as we take the folks through that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. You know, you need that lens to understand how your efforts are unfolding, and without that ability to generate that flywheel, right? That cycle, it's very difficult to proceed. And so the way we look at it, you know, there are a number of different categories you need to look at to be able to understand usage properly, and inform that decision. So first of all, obviously, what is most popular is critical, right? I want to know what is taking root and generating value, and getting a lot of usage. You want to understand trends as well. So understanding sort of increased popularity is very important. So that wisdom of crowds, understanding where is it that there seems to be some traction, as far as content that maybe there wasn't some before, maybe it has this new content that was published and it's starting to see an uptick. So not an absolute value, but based on a relative basis, there are some trends there that are interesting and should inform the entire process. And then, of course, decreasing popularity is also important. So if you know, we built some analytic and it was incredibly popular for a month or two, and then all of a sudden it's dropping off. Well, why is that, right? It begs a set of questions, a set of analysis to really understand that, you know, should that be repurposed? Should there be something changed in it? Is the audience finding it deficient in some way? You know, really allowing you to dig into that. And then finally, the unused content, right? That's the equally important piece of information to know. Well, this is the clutter, if you like, right? The things that were developed, lots of work went into it, but nobody's looking at it. And they're either opportunities to promote, or often just things that need to be deprecated. Perhaps some of that content is duplicative. Perhaps it's obsolete. Perhaps it has definitions that are incorrect. But in any case, if it's not being used, you know, take it out of the environment so that people are not stumbling across it as they're looking for the things that are actually useful.
It might be a tough question to answer, but in your experience, you know, who's looking at this statistics and how often? Because I love everything that I'm shown, but if I have one little tiny ache in my belly as a former leader of analytics, is you don't want to spend so much time looking at the analytics statistics. You want to take time doing good analytics. So any guidance, best practice that you see, you know, look, don't obsess over this like every day. It's like, you know, sort of Instagram death scrolling to see if your report winds up at the top.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. This is not something you typically are going to look at every day. What we recommend is a sort of a monthly cadence for content creators, where there's a review process that happens as part of each month, and they're accountable for it. You do want to make sure that people are looking at this and they're not, you know, just driving blind. But let's say on a monthly basis, reviewing what's changed, and then coming up with an action plan associated with it. And then if you advance to the next slide, you know, it's important to actually look beyond the surface, right? So this is a snapshot, but this is what we're showing you here is kind of a animation that occurs where in the center there is a particular piece of content, and then you can see kind of the users that are using that content as dots around the perimeter, and then the circles represent sort of 1 day, 30 days, 60 day, 90 day, and you can imagine, you know, as you play this animation out, it will then, you know, the dots will move out if a user stops using the content, and they'll stay close if they continue using it. And so this kind of a tool is very helpful because you want to be able to understand not just, hey, I've got 60, you know, over a 60-day period, this group of users or this individual user has been really using this content, used it once. The question is, how are they continuing to use it? Is if I published a new piece of content, is it that people came to it, took a look at it, and then never came back to it again? Or is it something that they are continuously coming back to it over a 30-day period? Are they using it every day? Are they using it more on a weekly basis? You know, understanding the usage pattern is very important. So digging in beneath the surface to understand not just the high-level number, but the trends and the time-lapse picture of what's going on with content is pivotal to making the right decisions about what content to promote, what to demote, and where to put effort.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I shared with you the funny story when I had to sort of get our content down, and this was a decade ago when I was in the US organization for IKEA. I basically just turned stuff off and waited for people to yell at me But this is a much better approach. One person took 9 months to come back and then said it was the most important report he ever used, and he was really disappointed I didn't update it. I had to tell him I could have made a baby in the amount of time it took for you to get back to me. But this is infinitely better, and I think the animation is super good. So I can see immediately the value of knowing who's using what and how frequently. And it goes back to that getting clean, keeping clean. This would be for me, this would be a brilliant tool to use. So super cool.
And then the final piece of the puzzle, I think, is really, and we're talking about content that's there and how it's being used, but it's equally important to understand what's missing, right? So if you've got some place where people are going to find the content, then a really interesting thing to understand is, well, what are they searching for and finding? Great, those are terms that people are finding. Maybe that might inform your tagging process, but maybe even more important, what are the terms that they're searching for, expressions where they're not finding the content? Right, because that identifies either opportunities to add content that's going to generate value if the searches that are very frequent, or perhaps that content actually exists, but it's been mistagged. It doesn't have the right classification. So it helps you understand, the analysts understand how to better curate and how to better organize and tag and provide context to make things discoverable for the users that are looking at. So that's important as well.
Super cool. What a great opportunity too, because if you're an analyst who's focused maybe as gross margin, you can figure out who's not finding my gross margin reports and what am I doing wrong and or what more do they need from me or that kind of thing. I think that's a really great bridge to building that relationship between the analyst and the business user. So another great tool that super valuable. So I mean, our central thesis is that when you do this better with tools like Metric Insights has and a disciplined process, you actually get a win-win. And I hate that word. It feels like I'm selling timeshares. But what we mean by that is you will have business users who can find what they want, can trust what they find, and therefore can act. And that's absolutely the most important thing. And as a result, that time will come back to you as an analytics leader. We've seen this time and time again in clients that have been focused and kept the push on a self-serve initiative. And that will make also happier coworkers in your advanced analytics department, because there aren't very many data scientists out there who just love answering a question about updating the next financial report. So you actually have much better chance of having happier consumers and happier producers. And then I think really important is, we get the question a lot and we have some good models for it, but you need to put systems and technology in place for the model to measure your ROI. And I think with the tools that you have shown us, it's always possible to say, yeah, these are the reports that we use. These are the people that are using them this frequently. These are the business decisions we've made. We can tie those business decisions directly to these reports. And you're so much more tangible and closer to an ROI. So I think you've helped a lot with our pizza slices getting inverted, but I know we have a few more things to share.
So I just want to, just kind of, this is a wrap up, and I think it kind of goes back to what you were just saying. Process is paramount. It should go first, right? The technology you use to enable this obviously is important, but in the absence of the correct process, it's useless. So you need to make sure you really are thinking about what your goals are, and the right sort of high-level sequence to follow is first make sure you have that clean, engaging content that create a garden and not a jungle, or a museum, if you like, whatever analogy you like, but create an environment where the content's up there, is actually not duplicative, is relevant, is timely. And then once you've done that, then the next step is to really fold in that certification and lineage, the ability to understand, what is the trusted content, who is certifying a particular piece of content, what are the things that it's certified for, which enterprise KPIs it maps to, et cetera. And then for the content producer, understanding, and even sometimes the consumer, understanding, where does this data come from? Is it coming from the data warehouse? Which table is it coming from? Which view? And so forth, so that I understand what I'm looking at. Right? That's very important. And then having done that, then making sure that you surface that in a way that you've balanced security and discoverability. So absolutely everything should be secure. They should be tagged with the right metadata, et cetera, but it needs to be discoverable to the right audience so that there's not creation of duplicative content. And then finally, as you mentioned, Drew, that you need to be able to monitor usage to be able to look at what's working and what's not working as far as the investments that are made in the consumption model, so that you can iterate on this process, because this is a journey. It is not something that you're going, you're going to just snap your fingers and you've arrived. Getting self-service is something that you lay the foundation for it, and you just keep on working at it, and you keep on improving at it, and it pays off tremendous dividends if you do.
Yeah, it does. Again, up there with my win-win phraseology. It is a journey, right? This isn't an end. We don't pretend that in the research brief. We don't say you do this and then you're never ever going to get a question from your BI stakeholders again. We have a couple of questions from the audience, and I think we have some time. So Marius, let's check into that. Actually, they're comments, but I think I'm going to reframe them as questions because I think they're relevant questions. So one of the things that we hear from our clients, especially those who are really global, and I'm saying that because it's harder to reach out to people across the globe. We hear concerns functionally in larger functions about data hoarding, right? And I think as a former data governance, data analytics manager, it really annoyed me because it was not within our culture. We were a sharing culture, so why would you not share data? But do you see the possibility to use this actually as a opportunity to break that habit, if nothing else?
Yeah, I think it is if you have proper governance. So, what at least from our perspective, what we've seen best from a governance perspective is kind of have a hub and spoke model. So you've got that data governance center of excellence, if you like, that sets the standards. Maybe sort of what does certification mean? What are the processes that need to be followed? How a data set's going to be consumed within the enterprise? And then there has to be, and I think there's a separate question about this, but there has to be then the support of management to say, well, now at a high level, this needs to be enforced, right? So, if you're going to have a place where people are going to go to find the analytics and maybe the data sets that they're going to use, then that should be a standard. If you, analyst in team one, you need to publish content to that, and you can take a look and see who's publishing and who's not, and sort of, cycle back and help and nudge people along. But the idea being that if there's that process, if there's a high level of visibility and transparency around what the content is out there, then that, encourages the sharing of information. Because as a content producer, I want my content to be up there, because it doesn't look good if, everyone else's data sets are up there, but not my own. So you get a little bit of that social pressure, if you like, to push in place. That combined with some standards and processes, those two together can make that work.
Yeah, I mean, that's brilliant, because when we talk about being moving towards a company culture which embraces data, you do need to shift norms. So if you need to shift the norm from hoarding to non-hoarding, and then you're rewarding that behavior, you're making it really visible, that's a huge contribution to that movement. One of the things that's really interesting to me, that from a question or a comment that came through from somebody I know quite well, when I looked a lot of what we saw, especially when we were looking at the list of the used and not used, and we were looking at that the little bullseye chart, what goes in, my mind was automatically like, ooh, this is user feedback. This is somebody telling me that what I do has value and I want to understand more. And this is somebody who's saying they don't understand what I'm doing, and I think I'm trying to do the right thing, so I want to understand more. But have you any experience helping clients use this tool to kind of adopt, for lack of what might be better said as a product orientation or a user orientation mindset? Because it isn't, I don't believe, when in discussions you and I have had, we don't have the impression that it's just put it out there, measure it, don't talk about it. Statistics mean everything. There is a qualitative element to this. In other words, there's a user and creator feedback mechanism. Do you have any best practices that you see in your clients using this to get closer to the user?
Yeah, I think it can be an important tool, provided that, in my experience, that the right context exists, right? So as you said before, Drew, those numbers are there, and people can look at them every day, or they cannot look at them at all. And then how they use them is really the question. And I think that the key is to have, if they have the right kind of a maturity model within the organization, such that they are, they're looking at the user journey with the analytics, right? So they're not looking at each of these type of dashboards as kind of a single point, but rather looking at how these various personas within the organization are using all that content. Then once you overlay the usage information, it tells you, do you understand that journey properly? And have you created the right analytics to make that journey effective, right? By looking at what are people using, what are they not, what are they looking for? So it's I think, an important part of the puzzle, but it needs to be put together through a more cohesive strategy. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are. I mean, you guys talk to customers all the time. What do you think about that quandary and what you're seeing out there?
Yeah, well, so a couple of things. Firstly, is we have evidence that more analytically mature companies, those who are using descriptive better and using predictive and prescriptive analytics, are oriented on a product orientation. They are thinking about the continuous improvement cycle of making the right thing for the user, but always being aware that maybe they aren't judging that ultimately. So I think that what you say is absolutely correct, is that is a process, right? So the develop it's a discipline that largely is borrowed from software development, right? Where you put it in front of the user. If the user uses it a lot, you have something worthwhile, and you can track exactly what features they're using, and that kind of thing. So it is very much, as you say, a mindset and a process. But what I like about what you've shown us today is that there is a structure that supports that process better than, as I've mentioned, and I know I'm being a little bit silly, but it's actually quite true, better than an email communication, from the marketing manager responsible for, measuring out of home activity, saying, I don't understand this report. What don't you understand about the report? And you get this email chain that's a billion things long. I'd rather know that I built that report and that she clicked on it once, and then it went from the 30-day click and then just disappeared into the 90-day click in your little circles. And then I would just start the conversation. Hey, Maria, what did I get wrong? I'm really sorry. I thought I understood you. And there's power in that conversation. But if you don't even know how to start that conversation because you don't know that she didn't use it, it's all gone, right? So I think from our point of view, anything that creates the opportunity for the person creating the analytical product to understand that they might want to start a conversation with the person who's supposed to be using the analytical product is worthwhile. So all of the stuff that you showed us are great places to get that understanding. So I think it's quite good. We see that statistically we can bear out that it's powerful stuff. So super good. Well, we have, I think, covered a lot of the questions, and we had some questions that were asked, but that you covered along the way, so we didn't have to really revisit them.
There's one more question I see here that thought asked it. How does self-service be addressed with top management users? Usually those people don't have time to even browse the content and move between different reports. So I'll just address that. Just from our perspective, I think there is this class of users that isn't going to come to a portal. And typically the way that we believe that should be handled is through push. So, you create this set of certified content that then you distribute out to users, and you push via bursts or email digests, if you like, that are curated by a analyst. And that's a very common consumption model. We see that at least with our customers very broadly, and that addresses those class of users. They're just very limited, have very limited time, whether they be executives like what you were saying, Saad, or if they could all even be like salespeople out in the field. I don't have time to go log into a portal. I just want to give me an email that tells me what it is that I need to take action on today, right? But I need to know that what I'm receiving is trusted. Don't make me go out and select the report I'm going to get. A self-service to that individual just means I look at my email and I find out my solution and I work from it there, or I get a push notification associated with it. So we didn't really talk about it much in this presentation, but the distribution components, the bursting, the exception reporting, as well as the ability to push dashboards across from different platforms into a single email. Those are all really parts of the overall solution that you would typically come to in order to promote data literacy enterprise-wide within all the different personas that you have within your organization.
Yeah, that's great. We have another question we'll cover, but I will also add something to that, Marius, which is that I know that it's tough. I can understand that person might have had a certain C-suite executive in their mind when they asked that question. But I also think it's worth sometimes, at least the seniors in your analytics, pushing back a little bit and saying, it is 2021. We say we want to be data-driven, and you won't even look at a dashboard, which is really dynamic and really custom created for you, and you're waiting for a push notification. I got a little bit of a beef with that. And I can share with you that we have some clients who are infinitely more progressive, and we're talking Fortune 50 companies, where the C-suite is not getting emails anymore. They're using tools which are definitively built more for them. There's a lot more effort than there is for the rest of the crew, but they are in tone and spirit much the same as the rest of the organization. So I also think it's worth sort of using the quality of the tools that you have, like in Metric Insights, and sort of saying, yeah, but I know you're used to email, but could we try another way, 2 weeks? And if it isn't, we go back, because I think we are in 2021, and that attitude to me sometimes can resonate as a 1995 attitude.
I think that's a great point, because a lot of times when people are not using content that you've designed for them, it's because you misunderstood the persona, the fundamental persona you're dealing with, and the journey that they take with the data. So if you give that executive a bunch of dashboards and they're full of details, and what they really need is the high level numbers, and they need to sort of switch between 4 or 5 or 6 different dashboards to figure out what they need, then you've failed already. And of course, they're not going to log in. But if you design the solution from the get-go to say, you know, this is the place where if I check every day, I get all the information I need at a glance. If I need to go into detail, I go from there. Then you might have a completely different outcome. And so you can sort of, you know, maybe start with the distribution, but then work your way towards that more active consumption model. I agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we got another great question coming just last minute, but I think a lot of folks probably have it, which is, how do you make the leap between 3,000 people use this report to this report has helped us achieve some of our revenue or stretch goals?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think there you've got, I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, Drew, but to me, I see that really needs a process around collecting feedback. Right? I mean, it's really, you can't look at usage numbers and know ROI. You can measure them as far as engagement, but really the question is like, okay, now how I see that this person's using this report regularly. I see it's being engaged by this community. I think it's all about then really reaching out to those communities and understanding, well, okay, I see this is active. How are you using it? What impact does it have on the organization? And you can do that in an informal one-on-one type fashion, collect information, or you can survey the community, right? And ask information to say, well, what kind of ROI do you generate? There's obviously different, you guys know better than we do. You do this bread and butter for IIA, the many ways to measure ROI, but most of that requires talking to people and or collecting feedback. I think. I mean, what are your thoughts, Drew?
Yeah, we have much the same. I think there is just so much stuff that could be contributing to the outcome that you need to be cautious that you don't assign it to this reporting. One of the things I would add, which I think is really good, and it was in maybe one of the first few slides, is because you have it across operational areas, finance, marketing, you will start to see patterns emerge. And we have this in the paper as well. You will see organizational patterns emerge where functions are more apt to engage. They are more apt to basically, create the reports, share the reports across geographical areas. They're more likely to have those searches that are not received, but fix those through connecting to user groups and connecting to analysts. So you also want to measure not only through a survey of directly to marketing, but you also want to make it sort of comparative. And you can also in that way unleash the power of competitiveness within your organization, right? The marketing team has a lot more usage. And, if you talk to the marketing guys, they'll tell you that they feel like they've made some smarter decisions. I wonder if the sales guys might want to be inspired by that. And you can play a little bit around with that. So I agree, you can't connect it directly, but you can use it as a jumping off point, and you can use it as a comparative. And I think that comparative in a large global organization is really powerful stuff. So. Well, hey, we've only got a couple minutes, so I think we should close it now. We've got some great questions. We did get a comment that someone was having challenges with the download function. We will check to see that the paper can be downloaded. Apologies if you have downloaded that. You should have been paying attention to the webinar, so that's your karma coming back at you. All kidding aside, we will sort that out. So give us a few moments and we'll fix that download. You can go find this research brief, as mentioned, at the Metric Insights. You can find this recording in your email box about 24 hours from now. and you can reach out via the contact information that's provided to either Marius at Metric Insights or myself and the team at the International Institute for Analytics. So I think we have closed out well enough, have we not, Haley? Was there anything we missed as a person who does this?
You've done a wonderful job. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Marius.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everybody. Thanks for your time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.